Welcome to the Regulating AI podcast with Sanjay Puri. AI is changing the world faster than rules can keep up. So how do we protect people without killing progress? Each week, Sanjay brings you inside conversations with global leaders, policymakers, and innovators who are wrestling with that exact question. So if you're curious about the future of technology and how it's governed, you're in the right place.
Societies and democracy, or is it more than that? And from the perspective of Diplomatic Courier, we happen to think diplomacy and governance is not just a bureaucrat's sport, it belongs to everybody. So we believe in open diplomacy. Same reason we believe there needs to be this finding common ground approach to governance. So I know that we have a panel here today that thinks about it from the perspective of education and healthcare and policy itself. So we decided to bring this together here as part 2 of that governing conversation we started at the UN as an opportunity to look at how cross-sector pollination can happen so we can come to more answers. So I'll stop here. Sanjay, thank you so much for agreeing to this idea and lead the way.
Well, thank you. She made a very important point. We had an important session with world leaders at the UN General Assembly. This is a continuation of this, and we'll be carrying this forward at the India AI Impact Summit next month, and then other key milestones that happen. And I think the question is not anymore how democracy can be impacted by AI, or how AI can be impacted by democracy too, because it works both ways. Whether it is the fragmentation and things that you're seeing. And as I said, we have an incredible panel for us today. I'm going to have them basically introduce themselves and answer basically a framing question, which I think lies at the heart of some of the conversation today and some of the conversations that happened yesterday. The question really for all of you is that, is democratic AI convergence possible in this day and age, or is fragmentation going to be the norm? And are we going to see maybe a coalition of willing countries or parties, etc.? Where do you see this thing happening? We're sitting in the House of Kosova, so there are questions that they also need to know. So I'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. Hi everyone, Dr. Jess Conser. I am the Chief AI Impact Officer at Maginative.com, and I'm based here in Zurich, Switzerland. Welcome. And so the question, I think it's fantastic, right? And when I think about this, there's actually a spectrum. So on one end, you do have that fragmentation, and on the other end, you have more of that coordination and that convergence, like you mentioned. And it's very much a journey. So when I work with governments and thinking about how they're putting in place some of their policies, there's really 4 main areas that it kind of feeds into. And the first one is what I would like to consider around the hype zone. There's a lot of noise and a lot of talk around AI, but there's not a lot of action yet. And that's just because they don't have the infrastructure or the policies in place to support that. And then the second one is around like a wasted opportunity zone. So that's where there may be some investment in the infrastructure, but they don't yet have the guardrails in place to really accelerate and bring literacy along. And literacy is such a key foundation to really scale some of that and also lead the diplomacy. And the next one would be around the frustration zone. So here you have a lot of literate people, really engaged and willing and capable people who want to lean into that technology, but yet they just don't have a way to use it, right? Or there's not clarity on how they can actually use it within the scope of their work. And then the last one is that transformation zone. So that's really where that convergence is happening. That's where you have all of the right players coming to the table to have discussions, such as what we've been having here in Davos, to really think about what does it mean to shape that effective policy and have the right incentives and alignment up front to then lead it effectively.
Turn it over to you.
And the way I look at it, so fragmentation and coordination, I think we are seeing a phase where the countries are looking back or rediscovering strategic autonomy, and in energy and supply chains and finance. But as Mark Carney put that in his speech, I think two days ago, when the rules don't protect us anymore, we tend to we have the feeling we need to protect ourselves, but it comes at the risk of that we are creating digital fortresses, and as a result, we will be actually have more risk, less stability, and less prosperity, and also less innovation in these digital fortresses, so to speak. And I think also that fragmentation is very often looked at as a geopolitical or even ideological or even ethical problem or question. Well, at the end, it's actually not happening, or fragmentation doesn't happen at the level of values, but it really happens at the level of execution. And whilst we can often agree, despite varying legal systems and administrative speed and technical infrastructure, maturity and capacity, that we can align on accountability, high level values, accountability, transparency, human oversight, for example. But again, the break happens, or fragmentation happens on that level of the implementation and execution level, maturity and speed. And to cover that, I think, or this coalition of the willing is actually one really good approach to cover that and overcome that, because that shows, AI governance is being copied when it works. And so with the coalition of the willing, or a small group of people that are, and even countries that are willing and able to prototype, to showcase how it's being done, that can be then copied and scaled and implemented and being adopted throughout also from other countries. And democratic values, or we're speaking often about democratic systems and AI in democratic systems, but I think it cannot remain a question for democratic countries or democratic values. It's the most powerful technology we've ever had so far, and that comes with shared risks, and as such also we have to have shared constraints. Similar, like with nuclear security or aviation security, nuclear technology, there needs to be a baseline condition or conditions that have to hold even when regulatory systems or political systems diverge or are different. So again, shared risk, demand, shared constraints, and coalition to willing is actually a path forward, because the way we are set up as a global community, it's going to be difficult from the outset on to get the buy-in by everyone, but I think the buy-in can be achieved by focusing on these conditions rather than the aspects where we're diverging.
Can there be convergence on democratic AI and AI governance, or is fragmentation now the wave of the future, and should we focus on the coalition of willing? So just a brief introduction and answer.
Well, I can easily pick up from the last things I heard, because as the rapporteur of the European AI Act, and in fact now chairing the working group on the implementation of that landmark legislation, I can say that we tried to work on two different dimensions that both tells us about the challenges of cooperation at global level and of the possibilities of a democratic AI. These two dimensions are, we can say, the day-to-day dimension of the use of AI and the impact on everyday life, and so ethical issues on how we can reduce risks and how we can make the use of AI safer and build more trust among consumers, citizens, workers, entrepreneurs, etc. But the other dimension is the broader safety issues around AI. And so the issues that we just heard about, and looking at the AI as something that needs a global governance of the same kind we have seen for other very powerful technologies that can be used for the good or for the bad. And I think both dimensions tell us about what challenges we have, because on the first dimension, if we do not build some common ways of dealing, from the regulatory perspective and from how we organize economically, we will have the impossibility to tap into all the economic opportunity of AI. If we build silos that will create economic barriers on the use of AI in ways that we can all share and we have a common understanding, at least at a basic level. So there is this economic risk on the first aspect. On the second aspect, I think we have a broader global geopolitical risk, that we risk seeing division among the world, also among the democracies, but also between the different systems. While I think we should not abandon on these challenges, if I may say, to conclude, a UN kind of approach, so to bring everyone on board, because the power of this technology, its rapid evolution, tells us that we need to work together with everyone, if possible. And those that want to exclude themselves will bring us to build coalition of willings, but we should start with a broader set of cooperation possible. Then we do what is possible, what is realistic, but we need to do it. That's what I think we should also say, because I see a bit of slowing pace. I will be in India for the Impact Summit. I was in Paris. I always go to these kind of meetings. I hope the India Summit will help us accelerate, as well as I'm sure the debates here in Davos have helped to make some steps forward.
Just a quick question. You said everyone. You meant everyone should be included,
Yeah,
even non-democracies.
Yeah, I think we should have both kind of approaches, that we work with everyone for some basic understanding, like we do with the idea of the treaties regarding nuclear weapons or the chemical weapons. I give you an example. We are now discussing about the issue of killer robots, of AI-powered killer robots, kind of Terminators, kind of things. We need to talk with everyone about this. Then we know probably not everyone will be able to make steps forward. And then we have to not be blocked or vetoed by those that simply don't want to be part of a global discussion. In fact, I would mention on that also, as it was done before the speech of Prime Minister Carney, that I think also on these issues gives us some ideas.
Thank you, Brando. Combiz?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. My name is Combiz Abdolrahimi with ServiceNow. I lead global government affairs and public policy. I want to thank you, Sanjay, for inviting me. And I readily accepted this invitation over many others, not because of the subject, but because of where this will be held, the House of Kosova, because I've actually been to Kosovo several times. I have many good friends there in Prizren and Pristina, so I'm very happy to be here. The topic, I think, is very important when we're talking about AI governance. I'm sure many of you have attended many sessions here in Davos, and when it comes down to is our values and how do we want these technologies that are evolving, that are being used in multiple different applications, from financial services to defense, to consumers, to health. How do we want to align ourselves? How do we want to build? How do we see the future of this technology going forward to better society, better the outcomes? So very much outcomes driven. I think the part that's not necessarily missing, but that we don't spend a lot of time discussing, is around those values, democratic values, freedom of thought, freedom of expression. Not everyone is going to see eye to eye on what how AI should be developed and how it should be used. But I think when we're saying, democratic AI governance, or we're saying, coalition of the willing, I think we have to come together and identify here are the set of principles that we can align on how these technologies should be governed. And in addition to that, each country, each community may have its own culture. So cultural inputs are also very important, because the world is not, how should I say, it's not one. We're multiple communities, multiple interests. But I think at the core, we need to come together and align around a set of principles, especially the democratic countries that value those democratic values, and ensure that, at the end of this journey, if you will, and it is a journey and the technologies are rapidly evolving, that we are building something that is going to lift people and empower communities and make things better.
Thank you. Brando, I'm going to come to you. The EU AI Act was one of the first AI pieces of regulation out there. What have been some of the challenges in terms of implementation that face? Because there could be lessons for other countries. You're here in Kosovo and other countries who are there.
Well, for sure, one challenge is to reconcile the ambitions, the ideas underlying the legislation with the technical feasibility and the need to cooperate with those that actually develop the systems. I give you an example of something that is extremely important. I just arrived from the Strasbourg plenary of the European Parliament, and in this week, among many other things, we discussed also the risks of AI-powered deepfakes used to perform crimes of pornography, of violence on women, and cyberbullying, etc., etc. And this is a growing phenomenon. And in fact, this objective that we are pursuing with the implementation of the AI Act, of bringing more transparency on one end, making clear when a content is AI generated, and on the other end, to also install some limits in the most powerful models by saying, and it's not against free speech, because sometimes I hear this kind of rhetoric that I think is a bit sometimes instrumentalized for other reasons, but it's about the fact that we do not want that AI-powered chatbots convince minors to kill themselves, just to give a very blunt and clear example of what we want to prevent. This kind of ambition also has to reconcile with the technical issues that we need to face, for example, to create a kind of invisible marking for content to make it recognizable as AI generated, as synthetic, and the need to actually discuss, as I've done and we do with all the main providers of AI. And I give you another example, again, regarding transparency. That is, I think, one of the most emerging and important issues. The need to find a balance between innovation that is driven by getting content to train the algorithms and the copyright protection. This is an extremely complex issue that I cannot summarize now, but it's one of those areas where you see the challenges of reconciling an abstract idea with a legislation that can be operationalized, that can work in a context that is also evolving, so it needs to be flexible, it needs to be elastic, we can say. So we tried, I think with some success. We are now discussing with many organizations in the world, many governments. I talk almost weekly with governments and parliaments from all over the world about how they can learn from what we have been doing. Now we are, implementing slowly the law, also with some adjustments, because obviously we tried to regulate on something that is fastly evolving, and this has also some challenges. Well, the situation in US is quite complex today, because there is, again, the issue of the moratorium, and you have a very specific view of how copyright applies in the AI context. It's different from how we see it in EU. We do not think that it can be considered as a fair use of copyright to just train algorithms. So we have a different approach that we can say is basically more protective, as the basic principle, to the artists, to the creators. We feel like that in Europe. This is based also on our culture of the copyright. And I think that in EU, the objective is to, in fact, avoid this kind of judicial litigation. The idea behind how we are working on this area, one of the many areas that are dealt with by the AI Act, is to, in fact, build a good context for agreements, to actually create agreements between developers and the creators to avoid the lawsuits, in fact, but in a different situation than it is today. Today, without these protections, my opinion is that the artists, the creators, the creative sector at large, which is a lot of things, the music, movies, individual artists, they are in a very weak position. So we need to strengthen them in this bargain that needs to be built between creativity of humans and innovation that entails AI.
Clara, coming to you, small countries like yours are generally very agile in terms of transformational technologies. Should they play a leading role in setting up governance, AI governance standards, or should they just adopt what's available?
I don't speak of on that of a official government and policy perspective that has not been decided yet. It's really my personal reflections on dealing with AI governance. I can also share how we have approached it in Liechtenstein. I mean, we were really very early also with other technologies, like with blockchain, establishing the first comprehensive framework for the token economy already in 2020. So we've been systematically dealing with blockchain technology and crypto asset service providers since 2015 and 2016. And now with AI, we are in that process over the last 10 years. I think we realized, well, innovation, digitalization, the whole digital transformation and dealing with emerging tech is really not a one-off and also not an IT project. It is a cross-sector approach. It's not a status, it's an ongoing process. It requires a lot of strategic coordination that actually led to the establishment of my office. I went through this transformation from being focused on financial market innovation and blockchain mainly to the mandate to deal with on competence, coordination and strategic and implementation, dealing with innovation, digitalization and emerging technology on a very broad basis. So that has helped to have one, and we're working extremely close with the IT department and the other ministries together. So I think this is something to have that institutionalized really helps to break up these silos and coordinate effective implementation and execution. And then the approach that we have taken implementing it is really with three pillars. So to look at, first, of course, an overarching strategy on how we want to deal with AI within the administration, and then to focus on the first pillar, so an Office application like Microsoft that is AI enhanced with Copilot, for example, for like very general, basic use cases and on a daily basis. And then we build a demonstrator environment, so to speak, that is with an open web UI front face, and in the back end we can plug in various different LLMs, for example, so to guarantee that depending on the use case and depending on the applications that we can switch and be very modular and agile. And then lastly, we are also looking at specific sector-specific, use case-specific applications that we are then either build ourselves or that we're buying from the outside. And so I think that is like this modular approach that allows us to be very agile, but also agile, I think, is often misunderstood as just being fast. And it means more to have this iterative approach. So for us, implementing these projects it's just the iteration, the feedback loop is faster, that for sure, and that we can see it as an iterative design process and not as an IT project as such. And to your questions regarding the AI governance, and of course we are also looking at what is the role to play of states in that field. And this is something that, of course, on Liechtenstein level, that has not been discussed yet on even the government level. But what I personally think that, yes, it needs that kind of neutral, credible, soft power to introduce or to also support the building of such a coalition of the willing, or to showcase how such governance models could be implemented. And I think because we are not a threat to anyone, and we have, so to speak, no skin in the game, we don't have data centers, we have no, our own LLM or any other technical capacity. So I think that could be a very interesting position, but really this is not for me to decide. This is just something that I am personally reflecting.
Just to follow up, earlier you mentioned the coalition of willing. What would be your definition of coalition of willing?
Well, I think, I mean, also what my colleagues here already mentioned, that, well, nuclear technology, that was really state actor driven. With AI, this is more private sector driven, commercial companies being in that space that are driving that development. So from my opinion, from where I sit and how I see that, it cannot come also the UN as an intergovernmental organization alone is potentially, I think it needs to be co-designed with all the shareholders, all the stakeholders in that game. And that means, for me, I would see a private-public partnership that co-designs the AI governance. However, of course, ultimately it has to be anchored in public accountability.
Jess, you work a lot with companies. As she said, private sector is very, very important. When you see successful implementations of responsible AI in organizations, generally what drives them? Is it regulation? Is it incentives? Or is it culture or something else? For companies who are sitting here in the audience, tell them that.
I think it's a couple of things to pick up on what's already been mentioned. So one, having everyone involved. You know, the companies who are being very successful and intentional with their AI deployment and investments are making sure that everyone across the organization knows exactly how, when, and which AI tools should and or should not be used within the flow of their normal work. The other thing I think is that there's that mindset shift around speed becoming that main proxy for impact. And once you get out of that mindset and you're no longer focused on just driving efficiency, productivity, or cost reduction, but you're then leaning into the benefits of AI to drive increased collaboration, increased creativity, better decision-making, better analysis, better research, then that really changes the dynamics as well. And so when we work with clients, we kind of think of two dimensions as well. The first one is the activation layer. Do you have the right data, tools, operations, and processes in place to support that? And then the second piece is really around the culture, like you mentioned, but also the values, like he had mentioned, and making sure that the people have that literacy foundation to know, like I mentioned, when they can use the appropriate AI tools and how to do so effectively. And that feedback loop is super critical. Think about this. The faster you go in a car, you don't want to grip the steering wheel to put those controls on or the brake on, but you want the feedback to be super responsive, right? So when I was driving a Lamborghini at the F1 track in Monza. I took a performance driving class, and there's very clear signage as to hitting your braking zones on time. So I think governance isn't so much about the restriction, but it's creating that transparency. It's setting the right infrastructure in place to know when you need to slow down, when you need to go fast, and when you need to be more responsive.
You've had experience working in industry as well as in the public sector. Are there models that can happen in public-private partnerships on AI governance, in your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think governance goes hand in hand between private sector that are building these innovations and government in sort of setting policies and regulations to govern the building of and the use of these innovations. So, as these technologies are rapidly evolving, as we're seeing, right? I mean, a couple of years ago, look, AI has been around for many years. Let's start there. It's nothing new. Banks have been using it for many years for fraud detection, for for cyber threat response. And, you know, it's only now come into the public light after several years due to all of these LLMs and, you know, and now consumers are actually experimenting and using it to improve their own sort of efficiencies. But it does take time for companies, for governments to adopt these technologies. And as they're continuously evolving, the policies and the regulations, the governance also needs to evolve as well. And so that's where government and private sector go hand in hand. They should. And I think going back to kind of what we were talking about before in terms of values and culture and, you know, it is important to have, you know, we want to ensure that our citizens, you know, have those, if we're going to promote the adoption of AI, that AI is available to everyone, AI for all. That is a theme of the AI Impact Summit in India, and impact, you know, again, leading to those outcomes. What outcomes are we trying to drive, and how are these technologies helping to drive those better outcomes? Corporations, businesses, very much profit-driven, governments, mission-driven. We need to bring the two together, and governance is how we can bring the two together.
Thanks, Combiz. Brando, once AI regulation is passed in a country, block, whatever you call it, what enforcement mechanisms are important for its implementation for our audience?
Well, that's a very important point, because as the technology is evolving and the topics are very horizontal, you need to have a strong enforcer, which means that you need to invest in the public capabilities to actually be at the same level of knowledge and of capacity to operate than the big private actors, because as it was said earlier, this is a technology that was driven, contrarily to other world-changing technologies, more from the private side than from public actors. So it's a big challenge, in fact, to catch up in terms of talent, in terms of organizational challenges. But I don't see any alternative to avoid that there is a lack of public accountability on how we deal with this. And especially if you are ambitious enough, you could like it or not, but in the case of EU, we have chosen to actually forbid certain use cases of AI. In EU, that's already in place. It's one of the parts of the AI Act that is already fully applied, which is the ban on certain use cases of AI in our continent, in our space of the Union, which are, for example, the use of biometric cameras without the authorization of a judge that can be used only for certain uses linked to security. And we do not want to have mass surveillance through biometric cameras that is deployed without a strong scrutiny. We have forbidden the emotion recognition in study places and in workplaces. We have forbidden the use of the so-called predictive policing, the kind of system to predict who, based only on the predictive capabilities of a system of AI, will be committing a crime. We do not forbid the use of AI to strengthen crime prevention, but we do not want a system to trample the presumption of innocence and without any other element, only based on face or ways of speaking or where you have been born, you will be marked as a more crime-prone person. In fact, I studied this kind of usage in US of these kind of systems, and I think we have been good in prohibiting them. This was, in fact, something where, as you asked me earlier about challenges, also we have seen a lot of challenges, because you can imagine that I made a few examples. There are not many more forbidden uses, but these examples are very clear. These are uses linked to social control, to surveillance, to a restriction of freedoms of citizens. And in fact, it's normal that the executives, the governments, want to have more free hand on this kind of technology. So building a balance between the needs for the security and the control by the state and the freedom of citizens also in a time where this resilience of institutions is questioned by many, I think with some correctness in questioning them, it's important that citizens are protected by a misuse by the public power of AI, because I see this risk very clearly. Enforcement and consideration of the risks of mass surveillance, social control. We have chosen to forbid even some of the uses. Maybe you can also choose different ways, but you must be aware that these are actual risks of compression of democratic freedoms through AI. It becomes very easy compared to other technologies.
Just when companies are trying to implement, responsible AI, where are the areas, a few areas that they falter in most? If you can just highlight for our listeners here.
Yeah, I think the biggest one is that they kind of view AI as a tick box exercise, right? So they buy a whole bunch of licenses to Gemini, Copilot, or ChatGPT, and they roll them out to the organization. But then again, they fall short on having the right incentives and alignment in place to solve that question: is what is AI actually attempting to achieve within the flow of our daily work? What challenges are we trying to solve for our customers, our clients, or our students in the case of education? And then that obviously fills into the literacy gaps, right? So then they also take an approach where we're going to put everyone through the same type of AI training, and not everyone's going to be using AI in the same way. Not everyone has the same technical aptitude, and we all learn differently, right? So I think the companies that are really hitting the mark are leveraging that personalization aspect of AI. Again, they're creating a foundational layer of literacy around the terms and certainly the clear guidance, so that if something goes wrong, they know very quickly who to escalate that to, so that transparency is there, that accountability is there. But they're also then creating the successful sandboxes to where they can go and experiment with the new AI tools and create the innovation in that safe and closed environment.
Thanks. Clara, how do small countries build regulatory capability on AI?
How we did it with the Blockchain Act was really looking at to the meta level, like principle-based, technology-neutral, a risk-based approach, but that is pragmatic and viable so that it's not outrun by the technological development. So to really look at what meta level can you address that really goes to the root problem or the root question. What are the risks that you're really addressing? Are these risks already real or are they hypothetical? So to install the guardrails whilst enabling innovation. So we see regulation not as a hindering element for innovation, but actually to enable it, especially when there's a highly complex or densely regulated field, like in pharma or in healthcare, and or also in finance or in other sectors. So when there's already a lot of applications, it helps the companies and it helps the citizens if there's actually legal clarity and legal predictability and accountability. So then actually the companies are driven to invest, are driven to innovate, because they know what requirements they have to comply with, and they're not guessing or being with one foot in enforcement territory, which is not conducive for economic growth and also not for innovation ultimately.
I want to end by saying you've heard these folks. They will be hopefully here. You can ask more questions, but please give them a round of applause because these are fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Regulating AI podcast with Sanjay Puri. If you enjoyed today's conversation, don't forget to leave a comment. We'd love to hear what you thought. Share it with someone curious about the future of AI, and join us next time for more stories and insights from the leaders shaping what's ahead. Right here on the Regulating AI podcast.